Picture the night the sea decided to take it all back. A wall of water crashes 18 miles inland across northern Scotland, rising 4 meters above the normal tide. Before the waves settle, they have already surged deep into the marshes and river valleys of a low, drowning country to the south, a country most people alive today have never even heard of. It was called Doggerland. And under the modern North Sea, right now, its bones are still down there. For most of the Ice Age, Doggerland was not a myth or a rumor. It was the beating heart of Europe, roughly 200,000 square kilometers of forest, wetland, and hunting ground, connecting Britain to the continent as one unbroken landmass. So what actually killed it? The story you've probably heard is one giant wave, one bad night, an entire world erased in an afternoon. The real story is slower, stranger, and honestly more unsettling than that. Rewind about 20,000 years, back when sea levels sat 120 meters lower than today, low enough to expose the entire floor of what is now the North Sea. Where the English Channel is now, there was no channel at all. Just a colossal river called the Fleuve Manche, carrying the combined flow of the ancestral Rhine, Seine, and Thames. That river only existed because a chalk ridge once dammed a glacial lake between Kent and Calais until the pressure broke through in a series of megafloods. By around 16,000 years ago, this frozen shelf started turning into something closer to paradise, oak, elm, and hazel forest, warm enough for trees that shouldn't have survived this far north. People lived here, herds of megafauna moved through here. And then, slowly, the sea started climbing back. Nobody believed any of it, until a wet night in 1931 changed everything. A trawler called the Calinda, skippered by Pilgrim Lockwood, hauled up a heavy block of the black, waterlogged peat fishermen called moorlog, and usually just tossed back. But Lockwood took a shovel to break it apart, and the shovel hit something hard. "I thought it was steel," he said. Underneath the muck was a barbed harpoon carved from red deer antler, over 8 inches long and thousands of years old. That harpoon meant Doggerland was not empty seabed. It meant somebody had once stood there and hunted. That's not the strangest part. In 2001, an amateur paleontologist named Luc Anthonis was sorting through debris pulled up by a commercial shell dredger off the Dutch coast, and he found a single fragment of fossilized bone. It turned out to be the brow ridge of a young Neanderthal man, somewhere between 50 and 70,000 years old, the first Neanderthal fossil ever found underwater. His skull carried a small hollow scar above the right eye, evidence of a benign tumor under the skin, a detail nobody expected to survive 70,000 years underwater. When artists later reconstructed his face, they nicknamed him Krijn, and they gave him a warm, very human smile. A man with a face and a diagnosis walked this drowned country, and these people weren't cut off from the world either. In the Solent, off the south coast of England, a territorial lobster kept clearing debris out of its burrow, and divers noticed the debris was 8,000-year-old stone tools. That lobster had uncovered Boldnor Cliff, a sealed Mesolithic settlement with split oak timbers, twisted string, and hints of early boat building. Then, buried in the mud, researchers found something that shouldn't have been there at all. DNA from Einkorn wheat, a crop that originated in the Near East 2,000 years before farming was supposed to reach Britain. These weren't isolated hunter-gatherers clinging to a shrinking coastline. They were plugged into trade networks stretching across the continent. Which brings us back to that night. By around 6200 BCE, Doggerland had already shrunk from a continent into a fragile scatter of islands and marshland squeezed by centuries of rising water. Off the coast of Norway, a massive shelf of glacial sediment had been building for thousands of years until an earthquake shook loose something buried deep inside it, frozen cages of methane gas known as clathrates. Released from the seabed's crushing pressure, that methane expanded to 164 times its volume in moments, blowing the shelf apart like a structural charge. 290 kilometers of coastline and 3,500 cubic kilometers of rock and mud dropped into the Norwegian Sea in what's now called the Storegga Slide. The wave it created didn't just hit Scotland, it crossed the open Atlantic and rolled straight over what was left of Doggerland. Here's where it gets strange though. In 2020, researchers drilling into a submerged valley called the Southern River pulled up a sediment core, and inside it was a crushed layer of shells and stone, sandwiched between calm, undisturbed mud. That layer was the tsunami's fingerprint, dated precisely to that catastrophic night. But right above it, the mud goes quiet again, calm estuary sediment, business as usual. Doggerland's landscape survived the wave. The tsunami wasn't the ending. It was an interruption. The real killer was patient. It was the sea rising by inches year after year until the last islands had nowhere left to stand. Somewhere out there, the highest scrap of that lost country, Doggerbank, may have stayed above water for another 1,000 years after everyone else's coastline was gone. Nobody knows if someone was still living on it as the water kept closing in. So if a whole country, farms, faces, harpoons and all can vanish this completely and this quietly, what else is sitting under the water right now waiting for a lobster, a trawler, or a shovel to find it? Down there, under the cold gray surface of the North Sea, an entire world is still waiting to be remembered.